In the news tonight, the Senate President and members meet with the Prime Minister for an informal briefing on the general budget draft law for the fiscal year 2013, focusing on more self-reliance. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad announces a peace plan calling for a reconciliation conference with those who have not betrayed Syria, to be followed by a new government. And the kingdom continues to be under the effect of a cold front and a depression tomorrow, bringing a drop in temperatures, gusty winds and thunderstorms accompanied by hail and possible snowfall. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Royal Highness Crown Prince Al Hussein called on the Civil Defense Department headquarters and conveyed His Majesty the King's greetings to staff members and his pride in their noble duties in safeguarding the country and people. At a meeting with the department's Chief Lieutenant General Talal Al-Kofahi, His Royal Highness said the Civil Defense must ensure constant modernization of its operations to keep up with the Kingdom's advancement and progress in other fields. Al-Kofahi updated Prince Al Hussein on the department's upgraded systems of operation, training and field work in civil protection, as well as plans for future advancement in the protection of public safety and property. The Crown Prince was also accompanied on a tour of machinery and equipment used by specialized civil defense teams. President and members of the Senate met with Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour for an informal briefing on the outlines of the general budget draft law for the fiscal year 2013. According to the budget outline, the kingdom will receive $5 billion in financial support from the Gulf Development Fund over 5 years to implement priority projects in various sectors. Mansour said the 2013 budget is key in reforming the financial sector, decreasing budget deficit, finding alternative energy sources and cutting expenditure. It also translates the National Economic and Financial Reform Program, he said, noting that after the parliamentary elections, the government will enact a number of new economic measures that will affect the energy and water sectors. Minister of Finance Liman Al-Hafez said the 2013 budget can be characterized by improved self-reliance, saying there will be a substantial jump in local revenue to current spending in 2013 compared to 2012. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour met with women organizations to urge for their full engagement in the upcoming parliamentary election. Over a 2-hour meeting with women leaderships across the kingdom, Mansour pledged a fair process and transparent elections, but said there will be no true democracy without women's participation. Zainab Sufa has more.
The golden box, referring to the ballot box, dominated Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour's remarks to women organizations today as he urged the other half of society to be fully engaged in the upcoming parliamentary elections. During a 2-hour meeting with the Jordanian National Commission for Women and its affiliate organizations across the kingdom, Mansour said he fully supports women's demands for their rights, which he described are totally legitimate and necessary for the change that Jordan is pursuing. But he made it clear that the reform would only come from under the dome and stressed the need for the passage of fairer legislation to ensure women's participation, promising honest and transparent upcoming election.
I sincerely assure you and officially declare on behalf of the government and the state that we will have free and fair elections. This is a promise, pledge, a commitment and a reality. Neither the government nor any of its security and civil departments will interfere in the polls. This is our commitment as government.
Mansour urged women's advocacy groups to push their demands through, saying rights are taken, not given. He said while many opposed, he has been an advocate for women's quota, which is inevitable at this stage until women could gain more political experience.
It was I who proposed a women's quota at the We Are All Jordan initiative, and this is documented. But then we had proposed 12 seats for women rather than 6. The number should have been augmented to 30 for this election, 2 for each governorate and 2 for each Badia district. Political life is a training field, and as time passes, women become stronger and more affirmative. and that is achieved through participation rather than education.
Women leaders at the meeting said the Prime Minister made an open appeal for them to turn out in full force on election day in the interest of the country and as a necessity for a true democracy. They described today's meeting as a gate to a new phase in the life of Jordanian women, since it underlined there is no true democracy or reform without real participation of women in politics and legislation. Zain Abu Sufa for the News at 10.
Foreign Minister Nasser Judeh receives member of the European Parliament and Chief of the European Union Election Observation Mission, David Martin, to discuss preparations underway for the parliamentary election. Martin briefed Judeh on the mission's work aimed at ensuring a successful observation of the process leading up to the polls. Judeh said the government is ready to provide any needed support to the mission in line with agreed arrangements between the Independent Elections Commission and the EU to ensure transparent, free elections. Separately, Judeh and the U.S. Ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford, discussed ongoing developments in Syria and international efforts to end the conflict. Both sides agreed on the need to find a political solution to end the bloodshed and urged the international community to act responsibly in order to prevent a further escalation of the violence. They also agreed on the importance of supporting the Syrian National Coalition. Judeh briefed the ambassador on Jordan's enormous task of hosting a growing influx of refugees and providing them with basic and humanitarian services. Her Majesty Queen Rania chaired the annual meeting of the Board of Trustees of Al Aman Fund for the Future of Orphans. She listened to a briefing on the fund's strategies and goals, as well as vocational training programs. The fund director listed achievements made during the past year, including a rise in the number of beneficiaries by 15% in 2012. During the past 2 years, the fund graduated more than 500 orphans from different post-secondary institutions. During the same year, 500 students also benefited from the fund services, which include tuition, health insurance, and training opportunities. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad announced what he described as a peace plan, calling for a reconciliation conference with those who have not betrayed Syria. He said such a conference would be followed by the formation of a new government. In a speech in central Damascus, al-Assad noted the first stage of a political solution would require regional powers to stop funding and arming the opposition, an end to terrorist operations, and control of the borders. Khaled Dababne has the details.
Making his first public appearance in months, Bashar al-Assad called for a full national mobilization to fight against rebels he described as terrorists and agents of foreign powers with whom it would be impossible to negotiate.
We meet today and strive fill Syria, leaving no room for joy in any corner of the country. Peace and security have disappeared from the streets and alleyways of the country.
In his address at the Opera House in Damascus, al-Assad also announced a peace plan, calling for a reconciliation conference with those who have not betrayed Syria, to be followed by a new government.
We are now in a state of war in every sense of the word. We are now confronting a vicious external war. This form of war is more fragmenting and more dangerous than unconventional war, because it does not utilize its equipment to hit us, but it pulls us into carrying out its plans. This war targets Syria using a handful of Syrians and many foreigners. It's trying to use us to tear down our trees and destroy our foundations. And it is with pity that this is happening with help from some of our own.
Assad redeclared war on his foes and said he refused to open dialogue with the armed opposition, which has been slowly gaining ground against him in a war in which neither side has landed a conclusive blow.
But with whom we are dealing? People with extremist ideas who only believe in the language of blood, killing and terrorism. Shall we have dialogue with gangs conspiring with the outside and follow the orders of strangers?
Al-Assad said he will have dialogue with all those whose positions are not based on trying to destroy Syrians' principles and national foundations. The one-hour speech was al-Assad's first to the public since he appeared in a Russian television interview in November when he pledged to stay in Syria and fight to death if necessary. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
And on the ground, fighting and shelling were reported in Deir ez-Zor and near the central city of Hama, as well as near Damascus. 5 civilians were killed and more than 10 wounded, some critically, when a van exploded in the Sukkari neighborhood of Aleppo city. Violent clashes were also reported in the Salahuddin neighborhood in Aleppo, as well as Karm al-Jabal neighborhood. The Syrian Observatory Group said civilians were killed by Syrian army forces in Dar'a, including 3 people in Basr al-Harir and the town of al-Sheikh Muskin. Egypt reshuffled its government with 8 new Brotherhood ministers and pledged to complete talks with the International Monetary Fund on a $4.8 billion loan deal to stave off a currency crisis. A senior IMF official is due in Cairo tomorrow to meet Egyptian leaders over the deal, which will introduce tax hikes and other austerity measures. The meeting was postponed last month in light of the political unrest. In a statement to journalists, the newly assigned Finance Minister Al-Mursi Sayyid Hijazi said he is ready to complete discussions with the IMF. But as he spoke, the pound reached a new low, trading at 6.45 to the US dollar. Economists say the country's readily available foreign reserves will cover just over 2 months of imports. We begin with football and the Spanish Primera Division match between Real Madrid and Real Sociedad. It was a sensational start to the match after Madrid coach Mourinho dropped goalkeeper Iker Casillas to the bench in favor of Antonio Adán for the 2nd game running. But that all fell apart for Madrid after Adán conceded a penalty and was sent off for a professional foul, and Casillas was back. However, Real Madrid won the game 4-3 after 2 goals from Cristiano Ronaldo, Karim Benzema and Sami Khedira. Xabi Preto scored a hat-trick for Sociedad. But despite the victory, Real Madrid still remain in 3rd place, 13 points behind leaders Barcelona, who are now playing Espanyol, and halftime ended with Barcelona leading 4-0. And the 5th edition of the Dakar Rally in South America kicked off in the Peruvian capital Lima, with Carlos Sainz of Spain taking the opening 13-kilometer special stage. The Spaniard drove to victory in a time of 7 minutes and 40 seconds, beating Argentina's Lucio Alvarez into 2nd and French driver Gerlan Kishret in 3rd. Qatari driver Nasser Al-Attiyah finished in 4th place. The 8,000-kilometer rally will take the riders also through Argentina before the finish in the Chilean capital Santiago on January 20. And finally, to the weather outlook. Tonight, the kingdom will be affected by a cold front, bringing thunderstorms and a drop in temperatures across the kingdom, with a low of 4 degrees Celsius in Amman. Strong gusty winds will affect the southern and eastern regions, blowing dust at times. Tomorrow, the cold front continues as the country comes under the effect of another depression, creating a chance for hail and snowfall in most regions. In the Gulf of Aqaba, it will be relatively cold tomorrow, with a chance for rain, while winds will be southerly moderate to brisk and the seas choppy. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. The Senate President and members meet with the Prime Minister for an informal briefing on the General Budget Draft Law for the fiscal year 2013, focusing on more self-reliance. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad announces a peace plan, calling for a reconciliation conference with those who have not betrayed Syria, to be followed by a new government. And the kingdom continues to be under the effect of a cold front and a depression tomorrow, bringing a drop in temperatures, gusty winds and thunderstorms accompanied by hail and possible snowfall. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.